The ring wraiths are back, flying. The wound that they gave Frodo pain. So in the presence of the ring wraiths, Frodo is always feeling the pain from the stabbing.
So the ring wraiths are also referred to as the Dark Riders, same as the Nazgul. It's all part of the thing. Yeah. Except now they seem to have dismounted and become a bit like flying brontosaurus creatures. It reminded me a little bit of Jurassic Park. That reviving of the waking up of the wound, I think, is a good way of understanding trauma, because what makes trauma traumatic is that it can be woken up again. It's not something, as opposed to a more ordinary wound, you get over it and that's it, it heals. It may leave a scar, but it can't be reactivated again necessarily. Whereas a trauma is traumatic by virtue of the fact it can be reawoken. And that's what's happening here. Last time we were recording, we talked about this whole universe, the whole of Middle Earth being a place of memory. Nothing's ever forgotten. It's interesting here that is taken into the body, into the body of Frodo in this case, that the body itself, well, to use that title of that book that's very well known these days, the body keeps the score. And not only keeps the score, but actually that score can be added to.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of, it hurts again, this wound. You know, it's not like the hurt is finished. It's like a re-hurting. So there must be a connection there between the memory and the site of the wound.
Yeah.
So he hears or sees the Black Riders, the ring wraiths. That evokes something in the mind then triggers the feeling in the body. So to me, that's quite an interesting process that happens.
And could that be a reference to the soldiers from World War I with shell shock?
I mean, I hadn't thought of that, but in the previous scene, we were talking about the Battle of the Somme, weren't we? And just how much, and in fact, in some of the comments we had talked about, it was like the Battle of the Somme. Yeah, it could be like shell shock. Of course, shell shock was the old-fashioned word for what we now call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But yes, I suppose, I mean, it's hard to kind of always map these things directly onto wartime experience, isn't it? Because it's also fantastical and so on. But yeah, there could be something in that.
Well, and I guess that was done on purpose by Tolkien.
Yeah.
To make it unmappable.
But I think the difference between shell shock or PTSD and what Frodo experiences here is that shell shock seems to have been really debilitating for soldiers who are coming back from the war. Like they'd come back and they couldn't really function. Actually happened to my grandfather after the Second World War. He came back after having served in the medical corps in Egypt, in El Alamein. And the experience of all of that horror and injury and bloodshed and all of it changed him. And when he came back, well, he became an alcoholic and died of alcoholism, actually. So he just couldn't function. So I think in the context of the war, shell shock, as it was then known, PTSD, as it's perhaps now known, wasn't something that would just go away, enabling people to function. Like it really took away quite a lot of their normal functioning. So I think there are at least two different cases there. There were people who were truly messed up by it and just lost their mental faculties.
But then there was also the men, because I can't remember, I think my dad told me about how you'd see some old men like walking in the street and then they would drop to the floor and pretend to tie their shoelaces up. But actually in their head, they dropped because they thought something was going over the head, but then they were pretending to like do something with their shoes, and then they just get up and walk on.
I mean, I suppose that is the question, isn't it? You know, for all of us, when we suffer, let's call it trauma, at least with a small t, to what degree can we manage it thereafter? You know, can we manage it? Can we contain it? Will it be something that takes over, or not? So in the case of Frodo, he's managing to function quite well.
Yeah, he's functioning, but it's,
And it hasn't ruined him.
It hasn't ruined him, no. But
and to some degree, it strengthened him. It's made him powerful in some ways as well, because the wound it's given him a kind of resilience, I suppose, in some way.
So what did you think of the talking trees?
Well, are the talking trees the same as the Ents? Is the Ent the talking tree?
No, so the Ents are different to the trees.
Okay. So what?
I'm not really sure exactly how, but the Ents can move.
The Ents can move, okay. So the main character there that's carrying Merry and Pippin around is an Ent.
Yes.
But we also have the trees.
Yeah.
And the trees and the forest are coming back to life.
Yeah.
Seem to be coming back to life.
Yeah.
Something's been woken up that was dormant for a long time.
Yeah, and like Legolas says that there's a lot of anger.
Yeah. So it sounds like the forest has got its own agenda here. My reading of that is that now that there's a prospect of the ring being taken back to Mordor, now that the Fellowship is pursuing an agenda, which is promising in some ways, with that agenda there is the prospect of Saruman, potentially Sauron, being defeated. Now that Gandalf seems to be back on the scene, it feels like at last there is an opportunity now. The time is auspicious for the forest to act and exact its revenge or something, or retribution of some kind, or to even things up. Perhaps because it doesn't feel like they just happen to be waking up now out of the blue. It feels like there is an occasion, there's a prompt, that this is the time. The time augurs well for it. So I would assume it's because of those various things. And generally, although there is something a little bit unsettling and intimidating about the trees and the Ents, they feel on balance to be on the side of the good rather than the bad.
Yeah.
So that was my sort of sense of them. And in any case, that Ent is helping Merry and Pippin. It's assisting them. It's like a tutelary spirit come to life in tree form to guide them and protect them for a part of their journey. But as for the rest of the trees and the forest, yes, it feels like they have cottoned on somehow, picked up through their mysterious forms of communication, that there is an opportunity in the offing now for some sort of restoration or revenge or satisfying of their anger.
Yeah, and it's a very old forest. It's ancient.
Yeah, I mean, it's back to that notion really that nothing ever gets forgotten. I mean, I was asking myself then whether anything ever really dies in Middle-earth, and of course we do get that question. It doesn't. There is a question: does it die? No, it doesn't die. We've had a question of mortality in relation to men.
Yeah. Elves
dying or not dying. Arwen even had she embraced mortality or not? Of course, I mean, some, the extras, the orcs or whatever, they do get mown down. And in that sense, there are extras who die. But there seems a much bigger question, really, a more existential question, really, over who dies, what is death? Is death absolute? Can everything somehow be revived or not? Obviously, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking about Tolkien's Christianity, the central proposition of which is that there is resurrection. So I don't know. I think it's a question in this film. I'm not sure it's resolved at all, but there is a interesting idea of people coming back. And of course, in this scene, we've got Gandalf. Yeah. As far as people are concerned, coming back from the grave because we're in a phase here now of dramatic irony because we, the audience, know that Gandalf is going to come back because we've seen his non-demise. But for the others, it's kind of a miracle. It's a Lazarus-like miracle. And the question will be, did this happen because he has got gifts of resurrection? Or is it a miracle? Is it something wizardly? Although what we actually learn is something slightly more prosaic, which is no, he just battled the Balrog for ages and came out on top.
And just to go back to what you were just saying, Tolkien, there's a quote from Tolkien saying that all stories are about death.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, and in a way, all of this is about death in some way. Yeah.
And Gandalf, in that, I mean, he does battle the Balrog, who we learn is called Morgoth. But then he kind of slips beyond time and space.
Yeah, he does. And just, sorry, I was still thinking about this quote, everything is about death. In this universe of Middle-earth, I would suggest that life and death are not quite as strong as one another, that they're not quite opposites. It's more like death is actually the stronger force because there's always a pull towards it. Life is life by virtue of avoiding or evading death, not by being that which is stronger than death. So you can avoid death, and that's life, but you can never fully live. That's what it feels like here. Living is the avoiding of death. It's not the fulfilling of living. Does that make sense?
No.
So if you imagine, when we think about life, we think about a life force, positivity, growth, affirmation, generation, creation, all of these things. When we think about death, we think of the opposite of that. We think about the absence of possibility, negativity, non-growth, darkness, blackness, and so on. So in other words, we tend to think of them as opposites. Life over here is something very positive. Death over here is something very negative. What I would suggest, it's just the theory that's come to me now in these films so far at least, is that life never quite establishes itself as the opposite of death here, as the fully functioning, fruitful, flourishing. It's always dragged back towards death, to the possibility of death, risk of death, and just about gets away and posits itself in relation to death as having avoided death, never quite getting over onto the side of being fully functioning, fruitful life. So life here, to me, seems the successful avoidance of death rather than the complete fulfillment of life. Is that somewhat clearer?
Yeah. But when we see the scene between Merry and Pippin, I feel like that is a bit of life because they're talking about growing.
Yeah, it is. But again, they're at risk because they get sucked back into the tree.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, and they sort of, in general, represent levity and comedy, and they lift the film out of the kind of heaviness.
Yeah.
And in that sense, they're slightly more lifelike, lively. But, there is a question there. Oh my God, have they been, wrapped by these python-like roots of the trees? And it's a bit of a surprise, actually, when they get released, and it just sort of says, let them go, give them a break or something like that.
Yeah, because they had this moment of childlike kind of fighting.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's thrown into a life or death situation.
Yeah, exactly. Again, would slightly perhaps bear out what I'm trying to say, that death is absolutely itself in this film.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the overall structure. I mean, the quest here is to return the ring to the time before it was created and forged. It's not to generate a new world. It's to stop the old bad world from repeating. Success is a kind of negative plus.
Yeah.
Life here is a negative plus. It's not a plus plus.
And why is this such an interesting story then?
Well, because that's what makes for drama in a way, because there's always that risk of the pull back towards the bad, to Sauron, to the depths of the earth, into the arms of the Balrog, the swords of the Nazgul, and so on. I think this film is about narrow escapes from something, the whole environment and even the ring itself, which could, at any moment, suck you back in. It's almost like the whole film takes place walking across a bog or a quicksand or something.
If you put that theory to fantasy as a genre, I can see why it's such a escape for people. It represents life in the way that it can be mundane, or you can feel like you're not living, but you always survive.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's true. It gives you a kind of immortality in some way. You can you can survive. Yeah.
What did you think when Gandalf said, "I am Saruman"?
Well, I mean, we, the audience, as well as Aragorn, are supposed to go, gasp, what do you mean he's actually Saruman? And then he qualifies it, doesn't he? And says, well, because we began kind of as the same.
I'm Saruman as he should have been.
As he should have been. I am that spirit. We came from the same origin. We were, in a sense, this is almost a story of kind of Cain and Abel, or good and bad brother or something, one who went the right path, one who went the wrong path. How can it be from a single origin to ultimately antithetical creatures can arise?
Because he starts off as Saruman as well. Like, it's Christopher Lee's voice when he starts talking.
Yeah, so yes, it's a moment of great drama, but for me, that was done more for the dramatic effect, I think, than for us to really think this is Saruman now morphing into Gandalf, I think. And then when Gandalf makes that speech, it has a slightly didactic quality, like, beware. We can all start off well, but we can all fall. We can all become Lucifer in some way. I mean, maybe I misread it. Maybe it actually was Saruman.
No, I think it was for dramatic effect, but it's just interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. And of course, it's so, the screen becomes very luminous. I couldn't actually tell who it was at all. I mean, I thought it was Gandalf. But you can't see until it transpires, and then you can see it. And of course, his hair is whiter now. So what's interesting is he's gone from grey to white, Gandalf the grey, Gandalf the white. We know Saruman is the white wizard, right? So there's a complexity here, because although he's saying Gandalf and Saruman started the same, and Saruman went bad but became white, Gandalf went good but became grey. Now Gandalf is becoming white again. And yet the difference between the two, from a moral perspective, is supposed to be greater than ever before. So it's quite complex that he should become more white in this process. So one question is going to be, how is that going to affect Saruman? Is Saruman actually going to become less white after this? Is that, because that would be one way of playing out the logic of that. Or is another reading would be Gandalf's turning from grey to white here as a way of reappropriating whiteness for the good, and saying this has been a terrible aberration for Saruman to be portrayed as the white. I mean, it's deception. And so it's all the more important for Gandalf to claim whiteness as his, because it says, no, the white is right and it belongs on this side of things.
I enjoyed the use of the word smote as well.
Did you? Yes, smote. And with somebody whose surname is Smith, I always enjoyed the word smote. What
did you think of Treebeard composing poetry, and also the story of the Entwives, losing the Entwives?
The story of the Entwives I always found very odd, to be honest.
Yeah, it's almost straight from a fairy tale. It just doesn't feel...
Yeah, and also the name Entwives reminded me of wags, the wives and girlfriends for professional footballers. I found it very odd and slightly anachronistic, the Entwives. And slightly comic, even, the Entwives. But now, of course, I'm intrigued, because they said did they die? No, they didn't. We lost them.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing how that sort of plays out. But it was odd, and I assume that that's part part of the story of the forest and how it kind of lost some of its power or went into abeyance in some way, because if the Entwives were lost and there were just the Ent men, then presumably the possibility for generation was lost in that, and reproduction and generation was lost or partially lost as well. Presumably that's partly why the trees have, gone into this sort of dormant state. It's a very peculiar thing, because in this film, there are questions of gender throughout, and we talked about how this is obviously a man's world, to quote James Brown, in all sorts of ways. And there isn't really much parity given to women. The women who are in it, as we remarked on before, Galadriel and Arwen, are very idealized, as the ideal mother or the ideal lover, I suppose. We also now have the woman in the Rohan court, whose name I forget now. But then she doesn't appear in this phase that we've just looked at. So there's some questions to come back to there. As for his poetry, it's like it's not. Although we've had Smeagol, Gollum, citing verse in that slightly riddling way, this is different. This seems like the song of the woods, literally folk song. This feels like as though it's singing from a bardic troubadour origin.
Yeah, he's reciting poetry about Rowan, about different trees and...
Yeah, exactly. It also helps to understand the connection with the hobbits who are from the Shire. The Shire is a much more pastoral, okay, it's not forested, it's cleared land, so it's more, agricultural, it's slightly less wild, slightly less bosky, but it helps to make a bit of a connection with the Shire and folk tradition, low folk tradition, as it were, as opposed to high aristocratic tradition. And Merry and Pippin are sort of in that mode as well. So I thought it was rather nice, and it made me think of, at the time Tolkien's writing, there's quite a lot of interest again in English folk music, even among classical composers, Vaughan Williams being one of the most obvious examples. But you also get it, in modernist music. Bartok is exploring that more or less at the same time that Tolkien is writing. So there is a revival of folk traditions in music going on at that time, sort of early. Cecil Sharp would be the obvious other person to quote here. I liked it, actually. And there isn't much, surprising actually, there isn't much folkishness in these films, despite the fact it has so many of the ingredients of it. There could be more of it.
Yeah. With the Entwives, I find it quite interesting because it's almost like you're speaking to an older person who can't remember things. You think, have they made this story up? Is this real? Is it true? And maybe there's something in the forest that they've forgotten. Like, maybe they haven't lost them, they've just forgotten them.
Yeah, maybe.
What did you think of Shadowfax, the horse?
I liked the appearance of the horse, partly because there was nothing mystified about it. Whereas we've had the Nazgul on, these flying horses and so on. And we've had the moving trees, and soon we've had Gollum and so on. So we've had some very fantastical and CGI effects.
There's a lot of fantasy now.
There's a lot of fantasy. But Shadowfax appears, as far as the filming seems to do it, quite naturally, as a white horse running across a meadow. Of course, I'm interested in the name Shadowfax, The fax thing, I was thinking, I don't know where that comes from, but I was thinking Fairfax. This would be the opposite of Fairfax. So Fairfax is an English name. Fair and shadow would be opposites in some way. So it made me wonder about obviously there's a nobility to Shadowfax. But again, we've got this playing of white and dark, shadow for a white horse. I think shadow is not an uncommon name for a horse anyway, for a dark-coloured horse. Is that right?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. So I rather liked it, and I liked it because it was such a natural version of nature, as opposed to these highly wrought, mythologized versions of nature. And yeah, I mean, kind of made me wonder, where that's going to take us. And it's kind of the first time, I think, in the film we've had anything like that. An animal that's not am I right? And not a kind of mythologized animal in some way. Maybe I've forgotten.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I mean, there's other horses and ponies.
We have the pony and trap that Gandalf first appears on, don't we?
And Sam's pony that he brings with him.
Yeah. But this one, although appearing natural, obviously has a pedigree and a nobility, which is important for us to...
Yeah, because Legolas calls him Miri.
That's right.
The king of all horses.
Yeah.
Lord of all horses.
Yeah, which, I mean, just as the Ents have a history, we have the horses with their own history. And again, we have this notion that nothing just starts from today in this world. Everything's got a backstory.
Yeah.
And the horses themselves have their own race and their own lives happening maybe in parallel to everything else.
Oh, the eagles. There's the eagles.
But they're sort of fantasized a bit, aren't they?
I guess so, because they're quite big.
A bit like when we have these scenes of New Zealand. Quite helpful, actually, every now and then to have natural nature as opposed to fabricated nature in this. Because it could, there's a bit of a danger in this film that it becomes a little bit too constructed, a bit too contrived. I think it's quite important to have those moments there.
So we learn that Sauron has fear, and he fears Aragorn as someone who can bring unity to the world of men.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting because of all the races, you kind of think of men being you think of men being the least powerful.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you think of them being the least powerful, but I think you think of them as being the most, having the widest range of possibilities. They can be the most corrupted and they can be the most enabled and ennobled, for that matter. So I think that's what we're being asked to consider about the race of men. And it's a kind of philosophical thing, or almost an Aristotelian question. It's to be a man involves having choices, actually, about how you're going to act morally. And you can go low or you can go high. And at their highest, they can be almost divine. At their lowest, they can be almost bestial. So although it is a bit of a surprise, it's also a reminder of the wider philosophy, I suppose, here about what it is to be a human being, which is you can go high or you can go low. You can be very good and moral and heroic and all of those things, or you can be absolutely evil. Whereas the range of possibilities for other creatures seems to be a bit narrower. It's the breadth of choice. I mean, it goes back to, I would suggest anyway, to Tolkien's understanding of Milton and Paradise Lost, because in Milton, that is the kind of central teaching. It's like you have free will as a human being, and you can take it high or you can take it low.
Yeah.
That's the cost of freedom. The cost of freedom is there's a play across various possibilities, and it's up to you to own that responsibility and take it where you want to take it. But it can go very bad or it can go very well. And so, in a sense, it doesn't surprise me to suggest that Sauron could be afraid of men, because as much as they are stupid and mortal and vain and all of those things, and capable of some of the worst behaviors, the opposite is true as well. They're capable of the very highest behaviors. Yeah. And Aragorn is, I think, part of his function is just to keep reminding us that the best of men are better than any creature.
Yeah.
That's sort of what he's saying throughout the film. Men at their best are unparalleled.
Yeah, and it does feel like that's the main battle in the film is, the battle of men, like just thinking back to Boromir.
Exactly, yeah. And Boromir gets so far and kind of falls back. He never evolves as much as Aragorn, but he takes a step or two in that direction.
Yeah.
And is sort of showing us exactly that. Men can transform themselves in his case, there's almost a sort of reincarnation question. How many lives would it take for a Boromir to get to being an Aragorn?
Yeah, and he does kind of do it, but yeah, I mean he dies. Well, like Aragorn says, he dies with honor.
Yeah.
I mean, he did something wrong, but then
redeemed himself.
He redeemed himself, but in a tragic way.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of battle that men have.
Yeah, exactly. So he represents exactly the possibility for self-improvement as to sort of secular world, self-transcendence maybe is a better word. Yeah, so Sauron fears him. I mean, during that scene, when Gandalf is speaking, again, I had the same question I had before, which is, look, Gandalf, if you can beat the Balrog, come back, have all these gifts of insight, tell people what Sauron's thinking, know what he's afraid of, have all these magic tricks, turn yourself white, why aren't you stepping up a bit more here, you know? Because he just reminds us, you know, Frodo's gone on good old Frodo.
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear in the movies that he's not, because he's meant to assist, he's not meant to act.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I mean...
But also, like, I will say that 90% of what we just watched was not in the theatrical cut. So a lot of things were cut out maybe because of this.
Yeah, maybe. And I mean, I don't think it impedes anything, but in a way, it's just a pedantic point on my part, really, because obviously the action is with Frodo, and we shouldn't really be fretting so much about why Gandalf isn't using more of his power. But I mean, it...
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's... I don't think you're wrong for thinking that, because, yeah, he seems to... He's got his head screwed on, he knows what's going on, he's got all this info.
And power.
And power, but yeah, so why don't you just, like, do it? But...
Yes, because it would make the film too short. But anyway.
Well, I don't know about that. But yeah, but all those scenes were cut out, so in the theatrical cut, you don't get that. You just see, they meet him in the forest, and then it's like, right, on to the next thing. There's no talking.
Yeah.
So yeah, the last bit that we just watched was Frodo, Sam and Gollum at the gates of Mordor. Yeah, do you have anything to say about that scene?
Well, actually, I was thinking about the gates themselves. I mean, they are gargantuan, aren't they? Yeah. And they're opened with this effort by these sort of mini giants.
Yeah, I think they're the same creature that was in the Mines of Moria. Remember that big, like...
But there were two of them here, aren't there?
Yeah, but it's the same... It's not the same creature, because that died, but it's the same, I don't know... Race.
Yeah, well, I mean... the reason I like the gates is partly because of their impressive scale. But partly it reminded me of a board game. And there's aspects of the whole thing which reminds me of a board game, I suppose, a bit. You know, where you have an enclosed space on the board, which is a citadel, and then there's a countryside, and then there's another citadel over there. It's quite map-like. And because we've had the Rohan in a previous episode in their own settlement, obviously there's the settlement of the Shire itself. It feels to me like the gates, to me among many other things, remind me of the kind of cartographic aspect of this. You know, we're moving from one defended quasi-national space or city-state to another. I say city-state because it made me think of the city-states in Italy, northern Italy, particularly like Florence, for example, the time of Shakespeare or Machiavelli, and how, well, specifically I was thinking of, so there's a political theorist called Quentin Skinner who writes about the origins of Western political theory, and he says really it all begins with Machiavelli and Italy in the Renaissance. And he talks about these various city-states like Rome and Florence and places where, Bologna and others, where politics grows up as a means of managing smaller entities within a larger system? Will they have to generate their own rules? And it made me think of that, because we're going from, place to place with different tribes which aren't yet reconciled, which could be reconciled at one point, but are still, whatever Middle-earth is, it's not one nation, is what I'm trying to say rather inarticulately here. It is a space of fragmentation into what Skinner would call states, places with their own rules. Now, in nearly all cases, each state is coterminous with the tribe. So there's an ethnic grouping, and that accounts for a state and a location. And then there's another ethnic grouping and a state and a location. And another ethnic grouping and a state and location. So it is a picture of fragmented authority in different ways of operating. I hesitate on the word fragmented because it doesn't feel like it was ever once integrated and then fragmented. It feels we're the other way around in history. Like, in the future, all of these things will maybe somehow be integrated, peace will break out, and there'll be harmony. But despite how old Middle-earth is, politically speaking, it's still at a very early point in its evolution because there are these isolated, quasi-national tribes with their borders and their boundaries and wasteland between.
That's quite interesting, because in the beginning of the first movie, when they have that big battle against Sauron, the only reason they beat him is because they come together. And so it feels like it's very rare for Middle-earth to actually work together against one thing. And maybe that's the point of Sauron, is to unite people. And to show them how.
Show them how to come together, you mean? Yeah. He can be the adversity against which they unite, really. Again, one thinks of the early 20th century and the fact there are these nation states in different places with different tribes, effectively. So it's interesting to me that makes Middle-earth both very, very old as a place and very new, very early in its development from a political point of view, because the politics is all very tribal.
Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, and we'll catch you in the next one.